final topic I'd like to get to before we end, if you're up for it, is I'd like to talk about psychedelics for a bit.
Let's stay with the previous matter for a moment. On,
Sure.
on resonance, you started with
Okay.
that. Someone says this resonates with me. What does that mean? Is that a test of truth at all? Or does it just mean there's part of my brain that gets excited when I hear that you feel that way about such and such? You see, I think people, when you say it resonates, that was clear, and I think that's a good way to use that word. It means it rings a bell. But other people use that as a test of facticity. If something resonates with me, that means it must be true. If it resonates, what does that really mean? Now, I understand people would like to think that there's a level of intuition and we can't access it directly, but when something resonates, it means that intuitively it makes sense. I get all that, but then I just extend the critique to your intuition. Yes, you may have a very strong feeling about something. I'm not saying discard the feeling. What I'm saying is just notice that the feeling, that the review is not the movie. Let's put it that way. See, if you're always reviewing everything and saying this resonates, this part resonates with me, but this part doesn't, that's not the movie, that's the review. Yes?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's
yeah.
All right. You want to talk about psychedelics and all that?
Well, yeah, but there was this Harvard psychedelic group, that like a student group at Harvard of psychedelic enthusiasts, and there's this lecture on YouTube by them. I forget the name of the guy who runs it, but he has some interesting ideas. But he had this point that I found very interesting. He was talking about DMT in particular, but I think this idea, because I watched some more of his videos on psychology, he's basically coming up with his own psychological model based on what he's saying. And that goes beyond psychedelics, that would also include mental illness and all sorts of things. But basically, the idea applied to DMT is that DMT is a 5-minute experience, like salvia, which I've heard you talk about in the gathering videos. And so at the very peak of it, he says, there's this maximum chaos effect. And he was saying at the very peak, which he claims only lasts like 20 seconds or less or something of a DMT trip, it's a maximum chaos, maximum information overload, basically. And he said, anyone who tells you they take something away from that in terms of meaning or memory, he believes they're lying, or they fooled themselves, basically. Because what happens, according to him, is then you come down to these other layers where there's more and more order comes back in, and sense making, and then perhaps entities appear or stories appear, things that are more familiar to how our language and models of reality work. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, everything comes and goes, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yes. So it's important to have experiences and then not cling to them. Very important. If we can do that, we can go on living, which is beautiful. It's beautiful to actually be here, to live. And so I like that view of DMT trip. That's kind of my experience with that stuff. It's really high octane stuff and blows your mind right off its center entirely. And then probably the pleasure part, as you would say, is after the peak. I did have this experience. I have these series of experiences with Salvia Divinorum, which I talked about at the gathering. That is even more high octane stuff than DMT, a lot more. That's a different octave entirely. It's hard to get enough of it. You have to be real quick because someone will have to take the pipe out of your mouth. I mean, you're gone as soon as you get any of it. So I worked my way up to it because I was really afraid of it in a lot of ways. And my wife was tending me because you need someone there to tend you. There's a lot of things that can happen. You can get up and start destroying a room. This happened to a lot of people. Well, so anyway, she had me surrounded by pillows, and I'd lie back and prepare the pipe and all this. The first few times I got stoned and it was interesting, but I did not really get enough. But like the fifth or sixth try, I got enough. Now, that was my last Salvia Divinorum trip. That was years ago. It was not like any other experience because for months afterwards, I kept asking myself, is that other place real where I was? Or this is real? And I could not bridge the gap. I just couldn't decide. It was really hard. I mean, because this other place that I went to, which had other characters in it, and I was there, except I wasn't who I am here. I was something else. It was really bizarre. And I'd had a lot of, I mean, I experimented with psychedelics many years ago. Ketamine, I had a doctor friend who injected me and my wife with ketamine a few times. That was amazing dissociation experience. DMT, I used to smoke that in my 20s sometimes. But this was something else entirely. And my friend Robert Hall, a Buddhist figure, was still alive in those days. And in fact, I turned him on to a Salvia trip, which I talked about at the gathering. It shook him profoundly also. But before he tried it, I described this to him. And I said, was that our world real? And he said, come on, you know better than that. But the thing is, I know now that he was right. At least I hope he was. I think he was. But I did not know that at the time. I went through this period of actually several months where I started to feel that I had a glimpse into reality, and that this other thing that I was living here was not. I have no words for it. I couldn't bridge the gap. It was like they were too far apart. I couldn't. Neither world belonged within the other world, not at all. It's two different universes. Well, that's all just taking place in a brain. This is what happens when a certain amount of some certain chemical alters the ordinary physics of the brain. That's clear. It's not that these substances have magical powers, which Terence sometimes used to say they did. He thought, he was a wild man. But I guess I'm a bit of one myself in that sense. But it's not that these substances, I believe, have magical powers or genies built into them or something. It's not really like that. This is the sense of self, as I see it, is dependent upon a very fine adjustment of neurochemical reactions that are taking place constantly, countless ones. And you get some substance in there that alters those. And it's different. One good hit of DMT, you won't ask yourself if it worked. And see, it's not like meditation. Meditation, maybe you would try it, and yes, if you have one of these openings, then you'll understand that there's something to all this talk. But with a DMT, there isn't any of that. There's no denying it, and whether you believe in it or not. whether you practice DMT or you just did it once, it's all the same. Your mind will, your brain chemistry will be blown out. So that's how I see that. This is, I got to tell you, I guess we're closing now. I see this all naturalistically. In other words, I believe that what we are is a brain and a body. There are other explanations, all these spiritual explanations. I get that, but I don't have much interest in that. I believe that we're animals and that it's inexplicable how all this stuff is happening. There's no explanation that we have access to, but the brain can be modified in many ways, and when it is, our experience is modified. And that's pretty much how I see it. It's just naturalistically. Not that there's some outside consciousness and all this is arising and these objects look unconscious. I don't know. That seems a bit complex. I mean, this is what Ramana Maharshi said. He said, I'm so glad I never got involved in all that complexity. He meant of Vedanta. He said, I didn't take to it. That's those words I couldn't remember. He said, I didn't take to it. That's me. I didn't take to it. So I had the awakening art, but I tried to make sense of it afterwards. I read the books and everything and other people's experience. I tried to fit it into a box and I really couldn't. And I'm so glad I didn't take to it. Because then you're in a religion. And see, I'm not an atheist. You mentioned that before, atheist. I'm not an atheist. I just have no interest. I don't take to it. That's not the same thing. My mind doesn't work that way. It's really simple. But I had the awakening. So the terms that I have to discuss that are psychology and art, basically. But I'm not saying there's something wrong when Nisargadatta talks about it philosophically. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I got something out of reading some of his darshans. They're interesting. They stimulated my imagination in various ways. This is what I'm saying. Take it in, you make use of it, and the rest you just evacuate. And that's what I hope that people will do with what I have to say. Not make a big deal out of it. You heard it. Great. You don't have to follow Robert. You got what you got. Move on, go to the next flower, like a busy bee, and get some nectar out of that one.